Hello, everybody. Welcome, everyone, and happy Monday. Thank you for joining our webinar on Leading During a Crisis. I'm Paul Carantona, an Assistant Director with UNH Alumni Relations, and I have the privilege of introducing our speaker today. This webinar is part of an Alumni Relations series. We have more coming throughout the next 2 months, so please check your email, follow our social media, and see our website for upcoming programs. All webinars are recorded and can be viewed on our website. We have been thrilled to see our alumni and community members participating in these webinars, and hope you will continue to participate in future sessions. We are joined today by Marc Sedam from the class of 1993. Marc returned to UNH in 2010 and currently serves as the Vice Provost for Innovation and New Ventures and the Managing Director of UNH Innovation. Marc brought with him to UNH an extensive background in intellectual asset management, licensing, and startup formation. Among his many other accomplishments and roles, he was the founding director of the Peter T. Paul Entrepreneurship Center and serves as the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Innovation Research Center. He also sits on the Board of Directors for the Association of University Technology Managers, or AUTM. Marc is a key leader of the New Hampshire innovation ecosystem, helping to increase UNH's support of startups. Since 2010, UNH has been the largest financial supporter of the New Hampshire startup community, having invested over $1.5 million. And with that, it is my pleasure to turn this webinar over to Marc.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody, from wherever you are logging in from. I know we have some people from not only across the country, but I think a few places around the world. So it's nice to be here. I guess first, what I'd like to say, obviously, is that everybody is safe and healthy, and that in some interesting times that we're all doing our part to keep things calm, and that leads us to today. So what I wanted to go over for about a half an hour, 40 minutes or so, is the thought process behind managing through crises like this. Now, obviously, COVID-19 is a pretty unique scenario. Certainly something I've never experienced before, and I would assume that very few of you were around in 1918, the last time the country had to go through something like this. So, though the immediate situation is very unsettling and very hard to manage, in many ways the process behind this disruption is very similar to others, in that there's a sense of disorientation, there's a sense of what do we do next, and that there are some themes that come through that. And I want to walk through how I look at this situation. I'll give you some examples from my history, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So I guess the first thing to know is, though the specifics of any individual scenario are not knowable, I mean, it's the unknown unknown. You don't know what the crisis is going to be until it happens. But the fact that something is going to happen is for certain. So I have lived through several economic highs and lows. There are different disruptions in the economy. There are different disruptions in business practices. So I think the first thing to just admit is that something is going to happen to your business, to your opportunities at some point, every 10 years or so. And that the first time to be thinking about how to respond is not in the moment of it happening, but it's actually well before then, to think outward a little bit about your business or about what you're dealing with, and think about what you might do. So I'm going to go through this I'm going to break this down into 5 different sections, and think a little bit about planning, data, people, when it's time to pivot, and then maybe a little controversially, how to look at opportunities coming out the other side. And I say a little controversially because I know that, especially right now, people are thinking about, all right, I just have to deal with what's in front of me. And that's the right thing to do. But ironically, in any disruption that happens, there's always new ideas or new concepts that kind of break through, or things that are really exciting to me are the disruption of the status quo, meaning things you always assumed would be true turn out not to be true. And that I think is an opportunity for everybody, no matter what you do, to think about places that you can grow. And I'm going to do this across a couple of different ideas, because I don't want to just talk about what we're dealing with today, but I want to talk about a couple of different experiences that I've had over my career that each had a thread that I'm going to tie together here. So the first, and I'll explain this really briefly. So the first is Qualist, and that was a company that I ran. It was a spin out of UNC Chapel Hill. The early part of Qualist, when it was still in the university, and we were thinking about spinning it out into a company, we were ready to take a term sheet. We were waiting for a term sheet for the funding of Qualist on September 11th, 2001. And so we had all the planning in the world. We were ready to accept that term sheet. And obviously events changed. And overnight, that opportunity was gone. Now, in this instance, for Qualist, there were things that we could do, and I'm going to talk about them a little later, but we effectively admitted that in that scenario, we could not pursue what we were doing, and we retrenched a little bit. It took about 3 years for us to get the opportunity to restart that organization. Under that to the left is adamfan.com. It was a startup that I tried to create and was actually doing fairly well. It was a piece of video editing software in the sports industry. Again, got some really interesting traction, was talking to venture capitalists. That was in January of 2008. And if those of you who are history as a guide, in February 2008, the economy basically sunk. So I was sitting in my office waiting again to see a term sheet for a pretty significant investment in dollars. Within 2 weeks, that opportunity had dried up. Now for Adam Fan, we actually decided there that we were not going to go forward, that we just finished the company. It never got resurrected. It never actually got off the ground because the opportunity was so significant coming out, or the hurdles were so significant coming out the other side. It just wasn't worth the effort. The third is Autumn, and that's formerly called the Association of University Technology Managers, which is the professional association of about 3,300 tech transfer professionals around the world. Technology transfer is actually what I do. So I help the university manage its intellectual property and look for commercial opportunities for that. So we either license to companies, we spin out startup companies of ourselves. We're a fairly prolific office in that we tend to be in the top 10 in the United States of total licensing transactions most years. And what I'll talk about a little bit with Autumn was we just recently in March, early March, had to cancel our annual meeting, which was not only the most significant source of opportunity every year on the calendar, but also the most significant source of revenue. And I'll talk a little bit about how the decision-making process came up to that. And then last is at UNH now, and how UNH Innovation is handling the management of these different things. So it first starts with planning. The idea here is that though the individual crisis or situation is not something that you're going to be able to predict, very, very rarely are you able to predict that, but that you have to be thinking forward about that well in advance of any particular disruption. So again, the specifics don't much matter, but the concept of how your business or how your organization would manage through this is something that you can start to think about. So I've listed here 4 different examples of what a crisis might look like. It could be a crisis of access. So what if the internet went out and it didn't come back for 10 days? How would that kind of disruption affect you? Your customer base could change. You could have an industry might undergo a great number of mergers and acquisitions, or maybe a great reshuffling of the deck of what industries you're dealing with. New technology is the one we all understand. I was even talking to my daughter this weekend about the rise of email and the rise of different communication strategies, and how each time that a new communication strategy has come in, it has disrupted the way that we do business. And obviously now the concept of physical distancing, which, let's face it, none of us would have predicted that the entire country would basically be in pods of a family unit for the most part, that we would not be able to be with our colleagues, that we would not be able to have that in-person interaction. You know, that's a new one, but that's one that I think we're all going to look at going forward. So regardless of what that disruption is, the reflection and the planning comes from figuring out yourself what is the key resource other than money that your organization cannot do without. We all know that we need the finances to do the things that we want to do. And so that's a given. But what if you had the money, but you still could not operate your business, right? So figuring out that key resource, the thing that you cannot operate without, is the place to focus on. So in a tech transfer office, we think about, oh, well, our day-to-day operation relies on new ideas coming through, new intellectual property being developed by our faculty. But further, it actually requires that the research take place. And right now in higher education, most universities' research enterprises are paused. And so if we don't have inputs, then how are we supposed to do the work of the outputs? Now, those are really unsettling thoughts to think about. Well, what if this core resource isn't available to me? And I gave you earlier just a couple of examples, AdamFan, where we decided that with that disruption, we could not go forward. And so knowing that that would be your response when you're not confronted with it allows you to think about how you can go around that, or maybe find different ways to get things done. So I wish we all had a crystal ball. It would be great to know, in the current environment, it would be great to know how long this is all going to last. What we would have to deal with our conversations, we can get back to business normal. But what if we don't? What if you can't know when that's going to happen? That's where I think the creativity starts to come in. But before, I think where organizations make mistakes is they confront this unknown. They stare into the crystal ball and they don't see an answer. And they think, I've got a great idea, and they just start to execute. And I think that's where we run the risk of organizations making mistakes that they don't have to make. And so the second part of today is about the data. So when confronted with this great unknown, how do you go about figuring out the right data? Can you even collect the data in time to respond as a business? And some of you may be familiar with the concept of vanity metrics or leading or lagging indicators. In fact, Dr. Fauci right now comes out every few days and gives the update of the state of the healthcare, or the health of the country. And he often talks about hospital admissions as a leading indicator and deaths as a lagging indicator, and knowing which of those you're really tracking. So if we're looking at the leading indicators of total hospital admissions and we see those going down, we know that something is working. But you might see the death rate go up a little bit in the current environment, and you know that that's going to be a couple weeks behind. In all of our organizations, we have the same thing. And so what I caution you is about thinking about things like vanity metrics, the things that you can measure, but that don't actually hit the core of your operations. We all have them. They feel great. Great example is number of clicks on a website. If you had 2,000 clicks on a website that you were trying to drive your business, that would sound awesome. And if it went up 100% and there were 4,000 next month, that would sound great. But what if nobody actually ever did anything or bought anything or followed up? It doesn't matter how many click-throughs you have. It just matters whether somebody does something with that. And so looking early on and saying, what's the data that we see that we can act on? And when do we know that we've collected enough to make a relevant, actionable decision? Oops. So I will talk a little bit about scanning the horizon. So when looking at this data, we're trying to make decisions about when are we going to know that something changes? What does that inflection point look like? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the situation that we just had with autumn. So we had our annual meeting. It should have been in early March. And again, usually about 2,000 people come. So it's a really important meeting for the profession. It's a really great meeting for all of us psychologically, actually. It's where we get to meet all of our friends and we get to see good contacts. We get to do business. and we get to have be in a room with people who understand what we do. When COVID started to come about, it didn't come out of nowhere, right? The data came from Asia in early December. It was hitting the US in January. And we had this meeting coming up in March, and we all looked at it, the board looked at it and thought in the beginning, well, it looks all right. Looks like we should be able to make it. We should be able to host the meeting. The spread doesn't seem to be that large, but we wanted to make sure we were thinking about what was it going to take for us to say we did not want to hold the annual meeting. Now, in retrospect, it looks like a big decision to cancel, but I can assure you in the moment, it really was not very comfortable. So we talked a lot in the weeks before this about what data did we need to make that a decision. So even in that scenario, up to a week before the meeting, we had what looked like really record registrations. We had people were enthusiastic about coming, but you started to see a little bit of a wobble, and people started to hear more. The news came out a little more regularly that something was changing. And we had to talk internally about, all right, what is it? What do we need to see in order to make this decision not to host the annual meeting? So one of the decision points that we started with, which I'll get to in a little bit as well, is what would make the experience a not great experience for the people who are coming. Now, again, I'm going to wind back a little bit. Know what the impact of COVID was. And so, yes, if we knew, in hindsight, if we knew the health issues, it would have been much easier to do. But in a crisis, you don't necessarily have that data. And we started to think about, well, how many people would show up? That one's obvious. But would the experience be great? At what level? At what point, if enough people didn't show up, would the experience not be very great? So even if everybody was perfectly healthy, there's a certain point where we said, well, it would not be a worthwhile experience. It would not be valuable for our membership. And so we started to look at information like that. And the turning point was a few days before, when we started to look at, we saw our registrations were still great, but we started to see the hotels cancel. And so what we were looking for was data that we maybe couldn't see directly. And so when we started to see people canceling their hotel registrations, even if we didn't know that they were coming, that was a clear signal that the narrative was changing. And for us, in this particular point, when the state of California declared a state of emergency, that was actually the tipping point that everybody needed to make their decision. So again, in retrospect, it looked very clear what we should have done. In April, it looks obvious, but in the moment, it really didn't. And so we were busy trying to collect 3, 4, 5 different sets of data that would tell us what we needed to do to be comfortable. And in the important part about this horizon scanning is who's going to suffer if you get it wrong. And one of the things that we talked about early was actually the issue of health. What if we asked people to come, but they couldn't get home? What if they couldn't return home? The flights were canceled. They were stuck in a hotel. And that was one of the pieces where we said, even if it was worth doing, the risk that people would not be able to get back to their homes was too much. And so we really focused here on, who was going to suffer if this was wrong. And I think in each of your organizations, you can look at this too and say, yes, the financial implications are obvious, but then really, how do you recover from it, and who is going to recover quickest? So given that, this internal, in the planning stages and the data collection stages, it's looking at your core functionality. Like, what do you do better than everybody else? What can you hold on to as the data starts to tell you that things are starting to not look so great? And how would those core functions change if you had to be in a scenario like we are right now, where we had this physical distance, where we had to close down? And the biggest part for you as a business owner or for an organization is to get an honest assessment of what you do and how much of that can be uncompromised as you continue operations. So for us in the UNH Innovation, we actually realized that we felt pretty comfortable that we could continue on working remotely in most of the areas that we do. And I'll talk about that in a second. So we reflect on two things. What are in the best interests of your people, of the folks that work with you, of your colleagues? And then what is in the best interest of the people you're trying to serve? And when we make a decision as an organization, are we serving both of those constituents' needs with every single decision? And, you know, for me, this is the staff of UNH Innovation. I warned them that this would pop up. You know, the people are the most important thing. Your business comes and goes, your opportunities come and go, but the people are the most important part of every organization. And so when we think about making these decisions, I'm thinking primarily about the people who do the work, people that serve the particular needs or to serve the mission of the association. And one of the things when you focus about people is you realize everybody responds differently to a disruption, to a crisis. Some people are generally unflappable and they feel like, well, this is fine and this too shall pass. Other folks get much more uncomfortable. When you have a scenario like we do now, where there is the social distancing, now you have an additional emotional connection where you don't get that one-on-one time with your colleagues. And so reflecting a little bit on how your organization functions, how people like to function, is really important. I think everybody in a crisis internalizes what's happening differently as well. And so as a leader, that communication with every step of the organization, every stage of the organization, every group of people has to be really overt. In a time of crisis, you basically can't over communicate. And with that comes what I hope is some real frank discussions about what's happening. I think it's important for people in leadership positions to be completely honest, to be honest with how they feel, to be honest with the scenario, to tell people what you know when you know it. I think one of the biggest mistakes that organizations make is they try to wait to collect as much information as they can before sharing what they know. So there's this concept of, well, I want to perfect the information, or I want to make sure I have everything. And you can think about it for yourself, how you respond when there are long gaps in information in the middle of a disruption. Right? Most of the time, people just want to hear that talk. And you want to create an environment in your organization that rewards honesty, that someone's saying, you know, I feel uncomfortable about this, or I don't really like the way this holds, or the way this is playing out. And know that they've got supervisors, that they've got an organizational culture that will say, you know, we respect that. We respect, especially now in the middle of all this change. Things are different, and we might want to talk about things with each other that we might not have before. So this is in the middle of the presentation for a reason. So if you don't leave with anything other than what's on this slide, that would be great. So one of my main philosophies in dealing with this, and like I said, unfortunately, I've had to go through a couple of these kinds of crises over time, is it's a strategy of how to handle the disruption. And what I like to do is take your thought process and split it in half. So we're looking at a moment and saying, okay, we've made the decision to close. We've made the decision that we have to cancel the annual meeting. We make a decision that we have to close the business, right? And at that moment, we're going to pivot in both directions. So on one hand, and if you're in a larger organization with a staff and you've got people who can help you, you want to have some people, your operational people maybe, the folks that are really in the weeds with the work that you do, to look backwards a little bit. And what I mean by backwards is not return to some tomorrow that's never, or to some yesterday that's never going to come back again. But their job is really to look at the disruption, and you're trying to reduce the risk of all the things that you're doing. So you want to, you know, how can I make this affect the fewest number of people? How can I preserve the resources that we have? Is it better to shut something down, or is it better for it to go on 10% function? and to work out all of the details of those things so that that group of people is working with the organization to handle the risk that you already know exists and to handle the risk based on the decisions that you've already made. But you want different people. And this is, I think, the hard part for management. You want a different set of people looking forward and to say, okay, we're going to make this decision. We're going to cancel this meeting. We're going to assume that everything everything, there was a total loss. So what decisions would we make going forward, taking on the worst case scenario? And then how would we manage the business? And then have that group of people looking forward and looking towards, okay, what does tomorrow look like? What does a month look like? What does 6 months look like from now? And the reason that I like to do this is in a scenario like we're going through now is you get stuck. You keep getting data about the challenges that have happened, the knock-on effects of the disruption. And that can stop an organization from really productively moving forward and trying to solve the issues that are solvable, especially in what we're going through right now. Some issues are not solvable, but some are. And so I like to think of those two different sets of people doing that work, because then the folks who are looking forward a little bit are unfettered by the consequences of the decision that you make. The people looking backwards are focused solely on mitigating the results of the consequences of the decision that you actually made. So for me, this is a really efficient way for an organization to kind of do two things at once, hence the picture. And as you might imagine, but it's not like you can always just say, okay, well, let's go on to what's next. And I'm totally right about that. So even in the middle of all of this, flexibility is the key. You have to remain flexible because the data you have today may not match the data you have tomorrow. And you know that those are challenges that every business has. And again, I'll look at the autumn event that I was talking about, where that data, one day it looked great, and the next day the data was fundamentally different. And we had thought through the process about what we might do if the data changed and we were ready to move. So in the middle of all of this activity, I think staying flexible and really being on your toes and making sure that you're making the best decision for right now is the key. So I'm going to pause for a second if there are any questions or anything that's coming on, because I don't see the Q&A. So I'm going to ask if there's any questions. I'll pause for a second, and if not, I'll keep going.
Yes, thank you. We actually do have a question. It was posted in the chat. Something I forgot to mention earlier is please utilize the Q&A function over the chat if possible. But we have a question in the chat, and that's perfect. So the question we have is, what has this disruption made easier thus far or foreseeable for you, TTO or Autumn?
Yeah, that's a spectacular question. So, and it's that whoever sent that is actually leaving some breadcrumbs that I was going to follow in a little bit. But, you know, one of the things that's made easier, so for those of you who, I'm going to talk specifically about tech transfer for a second. So I know there's some folks on the phone who are in the profession or on the webinar. So part of our reason for being is working with the faculty. So we need to talk to the faculty. We love talking to the faculty. We love engaging with our faculty, staff, and students every step of the way. And one of the challenges of tech transfer on a day-to-day basis is actually that no one has any time, because research continues and the work continues and the data collection continues. And ironically, one of the things that not only I seen get a little better for tech transfer offices around the country, but my colleagues have also seen the same thing, is that because we're on, I saw somebody this morning call it the great pause, which I thought was a nice way to describe what we're all going through. People have a little more time to reflect, and they have a little more time to collect their thoughts. And so what we're seeing is actually some increased engagement from our faculty. So they want to talk to us more. They have more time to talk. We can be more thorough in the conversations that we have because the labs have slowed down. Now, what'll be interesting is going forward, how will when the lab and the research activity pick up, how will that interaction change? And I would suspect, and I'm tipping my hand for something in the future, I would actually suspect that the Zoom and the not being physically in person with each other is going to be a benefit, that people get comfortable with the fact that yes, you can build a relationship effectively on a two-dimensional screen, and you can get that information, and that solves a lot of issues, because if you only have 20 minutes but you have 20 minutes in a video, that's all you need. So that's that.
Excellent. We actually have two more questions that came in as well. Do you have any suggestions for those of us that are being trained in management on how to push our organizations toward these principles?
Ooh, so I do, and it's a challenge, because it depends where you are in the decision tree and how much influence you have over the organization going forward. I do think that it's a little bit of what I just mentioned before we took the pause there, is trying to create a small team that is tasked with the future and are unburdened from the reality of the day. Now that sounds like a great job, and it's probably better than having to deal with some of the details that we all have to go under. But really trying to promote this idea of a small tactical team, of a quick action team, however you want to describe it, that is hyper focused on tomorrow and 6 months from now, I think is the best way. And from a management perspective, that's not too much to ask the people who are making those decisions to, let us uncouple from today, and then we'll come back and we'll feed back into what we're seeing. Because part of the benefit of doing that is, and you might actually see some opportunities that you can feed back in, which would change what the organization is doing right now.
Excellent. And will you please elaborate on how to maximize output when there is no input?
Forward. Good question. So I'll actually go back to the concept of a leading indicator and a lagging indicator. So in the tech, I'll just talk about tech transfer, and then people can internalize it on their own businesses. So I think about it of either pruning the bush or perfecting what you're doing. So there are a lot of opportunities that all organizations have, and you really can only handle a few. And so in the day-to-day, I think most organizations would admit that there's more opportunities, and you just don't simply have the time to get to them. So effectively what I'm saying is that in this pause, you're able to more fertily or harvest more efficiently the work that you already have. And that allows you to go into maybe those secondary projects that, hey, I don't have time to do this, or as I talk with the staff all the time, priority number 4 never actually makes it up on the 1 to 3 list. And so increasing the output is really more fully harvesting the opportunities that you have. Now, the problem is when things come back to normal, you're going to see a little bit of a lag because you kind of walked through all that data. So there is a chance that you would see some of those lagging indicators actually drop over time. So for example, if all of our faculty disclosed all of their ideas that they've had in the back of their mind and they had the time to do it now, would we see a decrease in some of those outputs in a year or 18 months because they effectively did the work today? So I think dealing with management, it's just important to let them know what you can see, influence, and measure, and what you might not be able to.
Thank you, Mark. And we actually have quite a few questions pouring in, so let me know if you want to pause to continue the presentation, or how many you want to take now or save for later.
Let's do 2 more now, and then we'll roll through, and then there'll be some time at the end.
Excellent. Honesty measures the leader's presentation against outside facts. What do you do to ensure the talk matches the facts?
So can you repeat that? I'm not sure I totally got the point.
Right, so honesty measures the leader's presentation against outside facts. What do you do to ensure the talk matches the facts?
Right. So that I think, if I understand the intent of the question, that really gets to the clarity of the data, and whether the leadership is taking on the totality of the data, or just taking a subset of the data and moving forward with that. I do think this is a place where, and this is where I was going to go next, actually. So, so we'll get there in a minute or two. Is that open communication and transparency, I think, is the most important thing. So for leadership, it's about saying this is actually what we're measuring. This is why we're measuring it, and this is how these data or these metrics are going to influence the decision-making process going forward. As long as management is transparent about why they're making the decisions that they're making or what data is there, it gives the organization itself, it gives the employees a chance to say, I think you're missing something, or maybe you hadn't fully considered this. But again, that assumes that there is an open dialogue back and forth with the in between management and the employees, and that in this moment that we're ready to hear inputs from every source imaginable to kind of pull us through to the other side.
Excellent.
So Paul, I'll take one more.
One more. Someone has a comment and then a question. Sure. I'm leading the incident management team for the county and my organization. Thank you. And the next
You're welcome.
The next question we have is, I've seen a huge increase in demand of some staff and a large reduction in demands of others based on skills or responsibilities. Do you have any suggestions on how to deal with this?
Yeah, and that's going to be an industry-specific question, obviously. But I know a lot of organizations around the country are trying to repurpose folks. So, like you said, obviously some skills are going to become quite in demand. HH&S, right? Health and just a healthcare response. And so part of that is, I think part of the response of that disconnect sometimes is figuring out what components of the work that needs to be done actually don't require the heretofore expected expertise. And I'll give you a brief example. So in the response to COVID, normally you might want to see a nurse practitioner or a doctor, but in this environment, I know the healthcare system is just responding, and they're trying to say, well, who can take a piece of this work and maybe do the inputs and gown in personal protective equipment and make sure other people are able to participate in sort of the non-expertise areas, leaving the experts to really focus in on just that work that they have to do. And so again, I think from a management perspective, it's looking at your employees and actually asking people what else they feel like they're capable of experiencing. And so trying to have that conversation between the folks that maybe see themselves as, okay, well, my position, I can't do what my job used to be because I can't physically be present. Either volunteering or having management ask, what else can you do? How can you contribute to the response that we're doing? How can you contribute to get us, again, to the other side of the crisis at hand? But again, some of those things are going to be specific. Obviously, you don't want someone without a medical degree practicing medicine. So it doesn't matter what that differential is. You're not going to be able to cover that gap. But I think you'd be surprised in most organizations, you might have service providers who also can help train your workers, who can help fill some of that gap so that everybody is contributing their small piece to the solution. So actually, so with that, I'm going to move forward, if Paul, if you don't mind, because I am going to actually address a couple of these things. So thank you for questions that lead me to where I was headed. I appreciate it. So, so shout out to Jennifer Lee, UNH alum, for the great poet Anna of Arundel from Frozen 2. Sometimes the only thing you can do is do the next right thing. And that actually calls back a little bit to the last question about when you see that disparity of what folks are being asked to do, or some skills are really in demand and others are less in demand. Sometimes as management, all you can do is the next right thing and figure out how you can take another positive step forward, whatever that happens to be. So, again, I'll look at a little bit about the experience with Atom Fan. When we had that disruption and my partners and I knew, we said, well, the next right thing is to shut this down, that there was no way that we could move forward. And there was a liberation in being able to do that and just saying the path back was too hard. And so we can save resources, we can save an investment, we can save personnel, we can save all of these different pieces, because the right thing to do is to not try to go forward. In other areas, what we did at UNH Innovation was, how quickly could we come back? How quickly could we reach out to our faculty? How quickly could we get back online with everybody working remotely? And the good news is, going back to the beginning of the presentation, we had planned years ago to try to make all of our work accessible virtually. Our database was in the cloud. Every piece of information was in the cloud. We spend a lot of energy on our systems here at UNHI, because the idea was that you didn't have to be here to get the work done, that sometimes you might want flexibility and you might want to work from home, not in a time of crisis. And so in having done that work, we all really knew that the next right thing was gather our equipment, take everything that we could take home, get up to speed, get as productive as we possibly could be, sort of get on with the business of what we knew that we could do, and to try to, and maybe just not worry so much about some of the things that we were planning to do. So when you're in a scenario like this or any crisis, what you'll hear a lot is just the biggest complaint people have is when they're not communicated with. So sometimes that communication is admitting what you don't know, and admitting that there's information or data that you don't have, and that what that's causing you to do. So my view is that in a state of disruption or in the middle of a crisis, you actually can't communicate too much. And sometimes admitting and having the humility to admit what you don't know is the most empowering thing, both for you and for the staff. Related to that, and this is really about today, right? This is a person I used to work with, Amber Lillystrom, who now runs her own consulting firm. She'd never talked about work-life balance. She talked about work-life harmony, which I actually kind of like better. And that work-life harmony is disrupted. And what success looks like right now is going to be fundamentally different than what it looked like 2 months ago and what it might look like 6 months from now. And as a leader, your objective is to really, this is the point where you have to pause and have some empathy. And to really, I mean, you should have had empathy before this, but at this point in the presentation, we're going to emphasize empathy. And that people's responses, again, are going to be very, very different. And that maybe it won't be as efficient. Maybe it won't be as productive. Maybe as much won't get done, but that's okay, because people have to have the psychological ability to take in things and handle them. And even some simple things like, well, we're all at home, so our children are at home because no one's going to school, at least in New Hampshire. Everyone's home from school and they're learning from home too. We've all experienced the Zoom call. We've seen more of our friends' pets than we've ever seen before. We've seen more children pop into the door and come out again. Where 2 months ago, that might have been very, very embarrassing. Now, everybody kind of says, yeah, that's the way it is. And I think in some ways, this has caused the country to humanize a little bit more and to really understand, yeah, you know what, there is a life behind my coworker, and that life and the work are actually in the middle of each other right now, and that's okay. It also does, it really emphasizes something that we talk about in the office a lot. We ask this question, how do you like to work? Which I think is to me is a really empowering question. So when new people come to the office, or when we have our semi-annual retreats, we try to refresh that question of how do you like to work? How do you take in information? And that's been really helpful in this environment, because I know certain people like to see things in writing. Certain people would prefer a phone call. Given that our work and our life is more intermingled than ever now, some people might actually really enjoy working later or starting earlier. And that's part of what you have to do in a leadership position, is just, I don't want to say it's everything goes or anything goes, but it might be everything goes. It's fine. You might not get that piece of data that you wanted at 4 o'clock, but you might get it at 7 o'clock, and that's okay. Or even the next morning, and that's okay. So what we did in the office, which I thought was, I hope was pretty helpful, I know some of the staff are on, since we can't do the big picture things that we wanted to do, or we had to take a pause on that, we went to some short-term planning and said, okay, we know we're going to be working remotely for a little while. We know that some of the big things that we wanted to do might not be able to get done. But what can we do in the next 2 or 3 months? And we actually kind of rewrote our objectives a little bit. We all have performance plans, and we said, all right, well, maybe some of the things in that original HR plan aren't going to happen because it's physically not possible for it to happen. But what can we do right now to be helpful? So we looked at some projects that were really internally focused. So how could we clean up data? How could we create reports? How could we, do we have inventions that hadn't really moved and we could close those files, or patents that we really had a chance to sit and reflect on and decide, well, maybe we shouldn't continue to spend the money on those. Maybe we should just stop investing in those. If you're in a different business, you might say, this is a great time to reach out to your customers. It's a great time to talk to people and just ask how they're doing. Because one of the unique advantages of this scenario, and I know that that's a hard phrase to capture, is, people are looking for interaction. People want to have a human interaction. And so just reaching out and not saying, hey, customer X, I want to try to sell you something, but maybe just, how are you doing? How are you handling this? There are a lot of stories coming out now that organizations are sharing more than ever. Organizations that are competing with each other are actually sharing more with each other than ever, because everybody's on the same scenario and everybody's trying to get out and on the other side to get back to what used to be reality a little while ago. So I think of this short-term planning as, you can actually invest in yourself. You can take the time to invest in your organization, to invest in people. Maybe there's online learning. We're very supportive of online learning opportunities, but maybe there are things that your staff can do to learn about areas that they're really interested in, so that when everything spins back up, I don't want to say gets back to normal, but when normal operations return, those investments will pay off downstream. And so we do have the time to make maybe some short-term planning and some short-term investments that have long-term implications, but things are just really hard. There may not have been hours in the day to do that a month or 2 or 6 months ago, but you have that time now, and to take advantage of that time. We are using one of the tools that the world has come to know and love. So at UNH, we were all, I don't know what they call them, we're Zoom heads. We've been using Zoom for a little while, but Zoom has become one of the most important tools that we had. And those in-person meetings are now replaced with Zoom or FaceTime or Skype. I want to take a moment really briefly to talk about informal communication channels. So yes, we're going to talk, I'm talking to you, we're going to have some conversation when this wraps up. Those in-person meetings are now moving to Zoom, and that's fine, and courses are moving to Zoom, and that's fine. But what gets lost in that is the informal chatter. And one of the things that we spun up very quickly at UNHI was the use of Slack. And so Slack allows us to have, and you can have Microsoft Teams or whatever it is, and Slack allows us to really communicate with each other informally. So it's really just there for us to do some chit chat. I have learned more about people's pets and more of what's going on in folks' lives in the last month than I had in the previous year. And it's actually kind of fun when you, again, I think it's a chance for us all to get a fuller picture of our colleagues in their lives. And then we make sure that we set some regular check-ins. We check in every Monday morning at 10. We have a Thursday afternoon check-in, a virtual happy hour, where we're all just there to see how everybody's doing. And I think, again, as from a leadership perspective, the issue is have time for those informal discussions. Have time where it's not just work, you're just catching up. It just gives you a chance to have a little bit of a conversation about what's going on in people's day-to-day lives. So, I got one more slide left, but it is worth looking at this as an opportunity to grow. And maybe it's not today, and maybe it's not in a couple of months, but to look at your organization, to look at you individually and say, what can I get out of this? How can I, maybe it's just learning how to compensate or how to address the anxiety that you might feel, or you have a new idea for your business that you think might be able to work. I want to make sure that I'm always checking in with people and asking if, how are you feeling? How are everything going? Do you have any new thoughts? I've tried to ask, I hope, enough. What works and what doesn't work? What am I doing as a manager that is working for you, or what would you like to see more out of me? Because you do have this moment where you can test a little bit about your communication strategies and your communication styles and how people respond to all of those things. And there can be some surprising answers. So to wrap up, this is a chance, and I want to leave everybody on a very hopeful note. So, you know, again, it is a little disorienting, but I want you to have a chance to look into the future. And one of the most important things for me that I try to talk about is that we don't know what the status quo is going to be when this particular environment is all over, and it probably won't ever be what it was. And just accepting that and saying there's going to be some different environments that we all have to deal with is I think really helpful and a little bit empowering. Can you attempt to future-proof your business model? Is there something you can do that if this happened again, the second Black Swan event happened again, would you be able to be more resilient the next time than you've been able to do now? And then the last piece for me, this is a little bit, gives you a little insight into how I think, is what parts of conventional wisdom are now not true? And that can be disorienting for some folks. Again, for tech transfer, we always assume that one-on-one faculty meeting in person, looking across the table at each other, getting to know each other was the most important point. They used to say tech transfer is a contact sport, but the definition of contact is fundamentally different now. And I actually think that might lead to some additional productivity. That might be the way that we want to have a conversation. Maybe employees don't actually live in your backyard and they're somewhere else. So an environment where you said, well, everybody has to be in the office. Maybe that becomes a more distributed work environment, and maybe that's better for your people. And then the last is just think about where you can invest if you can. Not to get back to where you were, but to get to where you need to be. So just the last example I'll give, and then we'll have time for Q&A, is, you know, in the work that I've done at Autumn with the board, is we always did in-person meetings and in individual one-on-one, or I'm sorry, in-person convenings where everybody got together in meetings, occasional topics. And, you know, now we can't assume that in-person meeting will happen all the time, or we might not even be able to assume that everybody wants it to happen in person. Asynchronous learning, video calls, more webinars might be the future. And so we're looking at that as an opportunity to maybe give people more of what they want, or give people information in a way that was different than what we had, but in ways that are maybe more approachable to a lot of the folks who are in the membership. So with that, I'm going to pause and open up for Q&A.
Excellent. And Mark, we do have several questions. Some are kind of similar, so I might kind of lump them together because we want to be mindful of the 1 o'clock time as well. But here's a question for you, and that's, you mentioned that your faculty members are actually more open to communication now. However, that is not the case with our organization, and they seem too occupied with the transition to online classes. Do you have any suggestions to improve faculty engagement in this scenario?
Yeah, that's a really important question. Again, in the tech transfer discipline, I do think that differs a little bit depending on the relative, how active the teaching load your faculty have, or what the access to the grad students are. And so, you know, again, with most of the research being brought down, it might be a chance to reach out and see if the graduate students are maybe more accessible than the faculty, because the teaching right now in higher education, that teaching discipline is the most important thing that we have to continue to do, because people need the education that they expected. The research has paused for a moment, and that we can't avoid. So it might be just a chance to say, okay, I understand that maybe you're not as accessible as I'd like you to be, but how about the rest of the lab? How about the people that work with you? Is there somebody else that I can talk to?
Excellent. And again, some of the questions you may have touched upon, but I'll give you the opportunity if you want to expand potentially as well. During these testing times, excuse me, how are you dealing with the performance metrics of your team?
Yeah, I covered it a little bit. So I don't want to say that we took the existing metrics from the year and said those don't matter anymore, but that's where we came up with that short-term plan. And we just recognizing that we don't know. UNH Innovation, I do not know when we'll be able to convene together in person and when the traditional tech transfer operations will get back. And so what we decided to do is actually replace some of those and say, let's come up with this short-term plan that we can talk about the advantages of doing the short-term work, and then look at that in the context of the annual review. And I will probably put more emphasis on the last couple of months, because this is where we're trying to just get us through to the other side. So a lot of what I'll do next is when the fiscal year is over, we'll look at the annual review. I mean, and you should know, I mean, people met their objectives. They should definitely get the bonus points for doing that, but then maybe emphasize a little bit more of what's going on right now, because that's where folks are pivoting and really putting their shoulders into the work that we have to do.
And as we've kind of talked about, that this might be impacting the future, and this might become maybe a new normal going forward, but we're not sure. But if this is perceived to be inevitable or advantageous, leading to this new normal, how can we lead corresponding changes in the mindset of our teams?
Wow, that is a very philosophical question. You know, I think it's about being it's about convincing people to be pliable, especially in the field of tech transfer. Well, actually every place. You have introverts and you have extroverts, and it's actually gonna require, I think, management, leadership to maybe adjust the expectations of different sets of people in different ways. And so there might be people for whom the in-home or the at-work environment is the key to their productivity, and that those folks might have to have emphasized work that is more required to be in the office. But people who really enjoy the flexibility of working from home, or appreciate the fact that they gain 20 to, depending on where you are, if you're in San Francisco, a 2-hour commute, or if you're in New Hampshire, a 20-minute commute, that they getting that time back is more important to them, and they can get the work done. I think the dislocation of the physically being present to be productive is probably the most useful thing to come out of it. And as management, I would probably try to push that with your staff a little bit to see how comfortable they can become in working remotely, and take advantage of those opportunities. In fact, one of the things that I've been toying around with is the concept of a virtual office, which in tech transfer is kind of not really that heard of. We could maybe have someone in the life sciences living in San Francisco, because that's where a lot of the action is. So thinking about things like that.
We have a few more questions, but we also have a comment. Thank you, Mark, for your words of wisdom. It was great to hear many points you made to reassure my approach, as well as offer some new perspectives. Particularly liked your comments about future-proofing versus getting back to normal. Great job.
Thank you.
And one question we have here is, do you think or have data that might suggest that people will have less of an appetite for in-person meetings in the future?
No, I don't have data for that. I do think that we're all forced to be more comfortable with the two-dimensional person that we're talking to. I think a lot of people I've talked to have been surprised at how much of that barrier was personal, meaning I don't like it, or I didn't want to do it, and I want to see the three-dimensional person in front of me. And that I think that's getting back to breaking down of some assumptions that turn out not to be true. So I think a lot of us would admit, you know, it's not perfect, it's not what we'd like, but it's actually okay. And you can see people's responses, you can see their emotions on their face, and that you can have more of a conversation than you might have expected, and have it be more productive than you might have expected. We still, trust me, when this is over, everyone's gonna have one-on-one meetings. Could be so nice to shake somebody's hand, give them a hug, and say hello in person. But maybe the tolerance for these video chats are gonna be much higher.
And just two final questions, which are similar and areas you've definitely touched upon, but in case you want to expand at all. Just broadly, how do we prepare a team for possible crises? Do you do wargaming, practice for scenarios? And also the second question, which is very similar, since good leadership is critical, how can organizations best prepare the people?
Yeah, that both of those I would answer very similarly, and that's for leadership to be thinking about the big questions well before you need to. So asking those questions about a conversation that I've had at Autumn would be, well, we're a member-driven organization. What if we weren't? What if we were not a member organization? You know, those are the kind of disruptive thoughts. Now, I don't think that'll ever be real, but I think management should have regular strategy sessions. Paige Smith, who works with us, she runs our strategy sessions every quarter, and we try to pick big picture, big vision questions and have really open discussions about what those things look like. So in other words, we want to ask questions that are hard and have open conversation and challenge each other when it doesn't matter. so that when the time comes for it to matter, you've been more prepared, and you get into that concept of thinking through things that are some of your fundamental assumptions of your business.
Excellent. And with that, those are all our questions, and we're right at time. So that worked out well.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. I had a good time. I hope you got something out of it, and be safe and be well.